Jerry, I'm thinking that even somebody like you must have bad runs, like everybody else seems to. How do you deal with them mentally?
They are harder to cope with as you get older. When I was younger, you might sort of, but that would pretty much be the end of it. I'm not really a bad loser. A lot of punters could be bad losers and say, but no, the losing for me is just an occupational hazard, and it's never ever affected me. I'm not a bad loser in the slightest. Like if I used to come home from the dogs to my partner at the time, it would be, this is very strange, it would be more likely that if I won a big amount, I'd be morose. The reason being, the adrenaline rush when I had won would be very, very manic with me. I'm a very sort of hyper person. Like, I don't know if it comes across what the filming you're doing now, Simon, but in normal life, I'm an extremely hyper person. So the adrenaline when I won and the being right would be extraordinarily high, manic. So the downside of any mania is sort of like a lethargic sort of, when I come home I'd be lethargic and sort of more down than if I'd lost. If I was lost, I'd just sort of come home and be like there'd be no peaks and troughs. So I'd just come home normal. So it'd be very, very hard to tell whether I'd won or lost. The losing, I've got to be honest, I know a lot of punters are going to say, oh no, the losing, I can't. But no, it's not really affected me badly, the losing, although we all go through losing spells, and I'm going through a pretty tough time at the moment since before Christmas. It's the 29th of January today, I think, so the weather does affect what you're doing. I've got theories why, but mainly it's the going. Like, you've got frosty tracks and salty tracks where it's been frozen and they've had to salt it when it's frozen, and then when the weather gets wet and the track's salted, it will create bias and things like that. But I have to say, the tracks are prepared awfully nowadays compared to, especially compared to Walthamstow, but as tracks was prepared years ago, even in the depths of winter, there would be no, there would have to be snow that day for a meeting to be abandoned. Meetings are being abandoned all the time now, where the tracks are just not being prepared properly.
So when you, people like to hear about bad days and good days, can you remember any particular
Oh yeah, right, well I'll tell you a few of the good days first. I started at the end of Walthamstow, when I found out Walthamstow was closing. I think I was out in Dubai or somewhere on an exotic holiday somewhere, and I come home and my friend threw a paper on the table and said, have you seen this? And there's a big picture of Walthamstow Stadium, Walthamstow to close. At the time it was pretty devastating, because Walthamstow was, to me, was like my mistress. I loved the place. It was it had very, very good memories from being a young boy and going there and then getting a living out of the place. I literally loved the place. But when I found out Walthamstow was closing, I didn't hang on to it and dwell to get a living out of the place. I jumped into other things, and the other things that I jumped into was Oxford, Crayford and Sittingbourne. Now, when I said earlier being thrown out of Walthamstow was the making of me, or getting the mobile phone ban was the making of me, because then I was betting on Betfair and there was loads of liquidity and my profits jumped up. When Walthamstow closed, exactly the same thing happened, but on a lot larger scale. At the time, I worked in an office, and Oh, I was the brains of the operation at the time. I was the main person picking the winners, and although the other people in the office done the same as what I did, I was the brains really. I used to say, look, this is what we're doing, this is where we go, this is what we've got to do. And my idea was that all of us would take a track up that we did. At the time, we was all doing Walthamstow, but I started doing Crayford. I was already doing Crayford at the time, but I started doing Oxford, and I told the people in the office with me to start doing Sittingbourne. As a brains trust, we was a great group. There was one fella in the office who just didn't get on with me. He didn't like me. He couldn't get on with me in the slightest. To be honest, looking back, I was a little bit of a bully to him, but it was only that he was sort of underachieving in a lot of ways. But looking back on it, I was a bully, to be honest. So I'm sorry to that person, really. But so we all started doing something different. I'd done Oxford. There was still a little bit of Walthamstow, but I'd give up on Walthamstow by this time. I knew that the bookmakers who was left at the track, I knew they would strangle me. I knew that they wouldn't let me get on. I knew they'd be betting at bigger percentages. So although I loved the track, for the last 6 months, I pretty much left it alone and concentrated on other things. And the other things that I concentrated on was Crayford, Oxford and Sittingbourne. Now these 3 tracks, at the time, they was just gold mines. And if you'd have just had one of them, and you was as good a judge as me, you'd be earning loads of money. If you had 2 of these tracks, you'd be earning loads and loads of money. I had 3 of them, and I was getting absolute fortunes. The money was just astronomical. I was getting the same as a Premiership footballer at the time. Good weeks. Good weeks, I was winning up to 100 grand in a week. But as an average, from 2008 when Walthamstow was closing, I was getting 30 grand a week for a long time. It was absolute heaven on earth. The amount of work that I had to do, I only had to sit at a keyboard. It was mentally hard work, like that. I'd be doing at that stage a couple of meetings a day usually. Like I'd be doing all the Sky meetings, and I'd do like other things. But my workload at the time was heavy, but I could do it at the time. I was still only sort of 30, 36, 37. I was still fairly young. I had a couple of kids. I was inspired because of my kids. And things was really, really, really good. On the downside of that, I didn't have a lot of brains. Apart from winning this money, I didn't have a lot of brains. That I didn't buy any properties. I just sort of had a very attractive girlfriend, who I had a couple of kids with, and I was off on holiday every sort of 5 or 6 weeks to Vegas, Dubai, Barbados, wherever I wanted to go, restaurants, fast cars. And to be honest, I got caught up in the moment, like I suppose a lot of people do, really, and I could never see it coming to an end. I used to say to people, as long as these eyes don't go, I'm going to be able to continue doing this for years. I knew that the bookmakers wouldn't let me continue at the level I was, because I knew that they'd stop me from betting in the shops. Excuse me. I knew that they'd stop me from. I was literally getting thousands of pounds on in the shops. If I fancied something at 8 to 1, and I said to my putter runners, look, take the liberty here, you've got to get on as much as you can. They was getting £1,000 on something at 8 to 1. An example, I fancied a dog at Oxford one day. The bookmakers at the track stuck it up at 8 to 1. I had to do the maths there. 4 of my putter runners got £1,000 each on it at 8 to 1. One of them got 1,100 quid. And I had about 1,500 quid on it on Betfair at 13 to 2. The dog won. I laid the 1,500 quid back on Betfair at 3-1 when I shortened it up. And won about £35,000 on the race. That was just one race at Oxford. I think it was about an A5 or A6. It was common for things like that to happen on a regular basis.
So all the boys were had to pick all that up in readies.
All of my mates and put runners was all driving about with, I think our car of choice at the time was a 320 Mercedes SL or something like that. We was all driving about in the same cars, and then I went on to a 650 BMW when things got better and better, convertible, and I was driving about like a fat film star at the time, or a fat footballer. Didn't have the bodywork for it.